Would you dare to cross the most feared waters on the planet? Even with massive ships and cutting-edge technology, most captains prefer to keep their distance from the African coast. It's not superstition, it's survival, and that's exactly why ships avoid Africa has never stopped being a brutal truth. The Cape of Good Hope may carry an optimistic name, but reality tells a different story. Their colossal waves, furious winds, and thousands of shipwrecks have created a maritime graveyard. Every vessel that dares to approach knows the Cape of Good Hope dangers, a cruel reminder that the sea never forgives those who challenge it. And if you think the problem is a thing of the past, think again. Modern pirates, political instability, invisible currents, and sudden storms turn every mile into a game of Russian roulette. These are the real dangers of sailing under Africa, and the question is simple: would you cross or would you change course? At the Cape of Good Hope, the waters have never been just waters. It was there that the legend of the Flying Dutchman was born, a ghost ship doomed to wander forever. That story wasn't created by chance. Sailors who dared to face those storms knew there was no room for mistakes. And that's exactly why, even today, many understand why ships avoid Africa, not only because of geography, but also because of the fear that turned into tradition. The cursed captain was said to have made a pact to cross the Cape at any cost. The result? An entire crew trapped between life and death, sailing as a warning to anyone who dared to pass. That image didn't remain at sea, it spread into European culture, from operas to novels. Wagner himself composed an immortal work based on this legend, reinforcing the idea that the Cape of Good Hope dangers are more than rocks and waves, they are a direct challenge to human courage. Sightings of the ship multiplied. Sailors swore they had seen the spectral vessel on stormy nights, always as a sign of impending disaster. Today, the legend is often used as a tourist attraction, but the truth remains, it's not just myth. Those who sail there know the stories sprang from real encounters with untamable seas. And it's in this mix of legend and danger that the real dangers of sailing under Africa gain strength, because every myth, at its core, is born from something tangible. So the question is, would you believe this story if you were alone, surrounded by the ocean, with 60-foot waves crashing against your ship's hull? Many prefer to laugh, but those who have felt the fury of the Cape of Good Hope have no doubts. And to understand why this region is still avoided, it's not enough to know the legend. You have to look at the cold numbers of modern maritime traffic, which reveal far more than ghost stories. Today, maritime traffic at the Cape of Good Hope is a true thermometer of global trade. Even though the Suez Canal has become the main gateway between Europe and Asia, thousands of ships still pass under Africa every year. And when we look at the numbers, it becomes clear why ships avoid Africa. Even with the route in use, it represents only a fraction of worldwide movement. In other words, it's a last resort choice, used only when there's no alternative. To put it in perspective, while around 12% of all global trade flows through Suez, only a small fraction dares to go as far as the southern tip of the continent. And this isn't because there's a lack of space at sea, it's because the Cape of Good Hope dangers speak for themselves. It's like choosing between driving on a well-lit, straight road or taking your chances on a dark canyon full of deadly curves. Few venture there without necessity. In this game, lost time can cost billions in goods. The contrast becomes even clearer when you look at logistics. A ship taking the African route faces days or sometimes even weeks of additional sailing, depending on its destination. Every extra day means more fuel burned, more strain on the crew, and higher shipping costs. That's why transport companies only turn to this route when incidents like the Ever Given blocking Suez occur. In those situations, the real dangers of sailing under Africa become the necessary evil. And there's another factor: the environmental and financial impact. To round the Cape, a cargo ship may burn up to 3,000 extra tons of fuel. Imagine the size of that bill. And still, some prefer taking that risk instead of relying on the vulnerability of Suez. It's in this delicate balance that the true importance of the Cape of Good Hope emerges. But to understand why world trade is so dependent on a single canal, we need to look more closely at the strategic tug-of-war between the Suez route and the African Passage. The Suez Canal is the great shortcut that reshaped the logic of global trade. It cut more than 4,300 miles off the distance between Europe and Asia, making it practically indispensable for the flow of goods. That's why, when people ask why ships avoid Africa, the Suez Canal seems like the obvious answer. No one in their right mind would choose to spend extra weeks at sea when they can shorten the trip so drastically. But this dependence has created a new and extremely dangerous problem. Just think back to the ever-given incident in 2021, when a single grounded ship froze nearly 12% of global trade. In just 6 days, billions of dollars were stuck in line. That situation exposed to the world the fragility of relying entirely on one choke point. Meanwhile, the African route, with all the Cape of Good Hope dangers, became the escape route, expensive, risky, but inevitable when the heart of trade shuts down. It's like having an alternate road full of potholes. Nobody likes it, but everyone turns to it when the main highway is blocked. The comparison between the two routes isn't only about distance, it's about strategy. Suez concentrates geopolitical power, influences fuel prices, and even shapes military decisions. Whoever controls the canal holds enormous leverage over the global economy. The Cape of Good Hope, on the other hand, remains the card no one wants to play, but one that can decide entire games when the unexpected strikes. And the real dangers of sailing under Africa only add weight to that fact, because taking this route is almost like playing Russian roulette. What's striking is that, despite all modern technology, the seas still remind us they cannot be fully controlled. The Suez may sit on a map, but wind, sand, and even human error can bring everything to a halt. On the other side, the Cape continues to defy anyone bold enough to face it. This duality makes it clear that behind charts and statistics, global trade is still at the mercy of nature's forces. And when it comes to nature, we inevitably arrive at the most brutal dangers the Southern Hemisphere has in store for any ship daring to sail those waters. The Southern Hemisphere is a place where nature makes the rules, and those who try to ignore them pay a heavy price. Unlike the North, where continents temper the seas, here the waters reign. This creates unique conditions, with powerful currents and storms that form without warning. For any ship, this reality clearly explains why ships avoid Africa. It's not about superstition, it's about survival in the face of forces that can't be negotiated. Between the 40th and 50th parallels, south lie the infamous Roaring Forties, winds so fierce they've snapped masts and torn sails in minutes. Even today, with modern engines, those winds can delay voyages and cause accidents. Picture steering a vessel over 1,000 feet long through relentless gusts. It's like trying to hold a kite in the middle of a hurricane. No wonder so many captains choose the calculated risk of Suez over the Cape of Good Hope dangers. And it's not just the winds. The massive waves that rise near the Cape of Good Hope can reach more than 60 feet, towering walls of water capable of swallowing entire ships. These maritime giants, documented in scientific records such as those from the European Space Agency 2013, prove that the ocean doesn't forgive mistakes. Each wave is a gamble. Either you ride over it, or it rides over you. That's one of the real dangers of sailing under Africa that no insurance policy truly covers. For seasoned sailors, crossing the Southern Hemisphere is almost a rite of passage. They know it's not just about battling rough seas, it's about accepting that the ocean has its own laws. When Bartholomew Dias reached the southern tip of Africa in 1488, he didn't hesitate. He named it the Cape of Storms, and it made perfect sense. Unpredictable winds, colossal waves, and treacherous currents turned that passage into a nightmare for any crew. That original name perfectly reflects why ships avoid Africa, because even the Portuguese explorer understood that the ocean, there wasn't a promise of future, it was a warning of danger. However, the King of Portugal had other plans. For him, that stretch of land shouldn't symbolize fear but hope. That's how the name Cape of Good Hope was born. It was a political and commercial move meant to encourage new voyages and the opening of the route to the Indies. In other words, the name wasn't born from the reality of the sea, but from the need to motivate sailors and investors. Thus, the Cape of Good Hope dangers were dressed up in an optimistic narrative. This choice of words shows the power of communication in history. Calling a place storm or hope completely changes how people see it. Today, when a tourist visits Cape Town and snaps a picture at the Cape of Good Hope sign, they rarely imagine that the name was crafted to mask the real dangers of sailing under Africa. It's almost like selling a house in a high-risk zone by advertising its privileged ocean view. The packaging may change, but the content remains the same. Few places on Earth carry such a dark record of shipwrecks as the Cape of Good Hope. It's estimated that nearly 3,000 vessels have vanished there over the centuries, a terrifying number for any maritime route. That alone explains why ships avoid Africa, because this isn't just about legends or exaggerations. These are concrete records of lives lost, cargo sunk, and stories that never reached their destination. One of the most infamous tragedies was the sinking of HMS Birkenhead in 1852. The British ship was carrying troops when it struck the rocks and began to sink rapidly. It was at that moment the phrase "women and children first" was born, as officers gave priority to women and children for the few lifeboats available. The event became a symbol of naval discipline, but it also exposed the Cape of Good Hope dangers. Even military vessels were at the mercy of the sea's fury. Another chilling detail of the region is the abundance of great white sharks that patrol nearby waters. For many shipwreck survivors, escaping drowning didn't mean salvation, it only marked the beginning of another nightmare. This highlights the real dangers of sailing under Africa, because here it's not enough to fight against towering waves and unpredictable winds. You must also face predators that guard the coast like natural sentinels of the ocean's graveyard. This long tradition of shipwrecks has turned the Cape into a kind of underwater museum. Marine archaeologists still uncover remains of centuries-old ships carrying porcelain, coins, and rusted cannons. If the Cape of Good Hope already feels brutal, the Skeleton Coast takes brutality to another level. This stretch of Namibia earned the name Coast of Skeletons for good reason. More than 500 shipwrecks have been recorded there, leaving rusted hulls scattered across the sand like silent witnesses of disaster. It's a scene that clearly shows why ships avoid Africa, because the mix of ocean and desert turns any accident into a death sentence. The most famous case was the Dunedin Star in 1942. The British cargo ship ran aground in the region and, although part of the crew managed to reach shore, their nightmare was only beginning. There was no town, no supplies, only miles of barren sand and unforgiving temperatures. Rescuing the survivors required both air and land operations that nearly cost more lives than the wreck itself. That episode is a living portrait of the Cape of Good Hope dangers stretching along the African coast. And it's not only the waves and isolation that kill in that region. Strong currents make rescue efforts nearly impossible, while the desert brings thirst and hunger as inevitable enemies. To make matters worse, crocodiles from the cunning river and land predators turn survival into an almost impossible task. That's why the real dangers of sailing under Africa take on an extreme form there. Even if you escape the sea, the land itself finishes the job. Today, the Skeleton Coast attracts adventurers and photographers seeking surreal landscapes, with rusted ships rising from the sand against the blue Atlantic backdrop. But behind the tourism lies the memory of a shoreline that never forgives weakness. And if Namibia shows this merciless face, what can be said of Madagascar and the Mozambique Channel, where the waters hide treacherous currents, violent cyclones, and human conflicts even more dangerous? The Mozambique Channel is one of the most treacherous passages in the Indian Ocean. Its unpredictable currents and tropical cyclones put every ship on high alert. It's no surprise that many captains prefer to avoid the area entirely, reinforcing why ships avoid Africa. For those sailing here, plotting a route on a map isn't enough. You have to contend with natural forces that can overturn a cargo vessel within hours. Madagascar, despite its natural beauty, is surrounded by notoriously unstable waters. Historical accounts tell how even well-armed colonial ships succumbed to the channel's sudden storms. Today, with all the advances in weather forecasting, there are still cases of ships being forced to radically alter course to escape cyclones with winds exceeding 120 miles per hour. It's further proof that the Cape of Good Hope dangers aren't limited to the far south, they stretch along the entire eastern coast. And it's not just nature that poses a threat. In recent years, the region has also faced Islamist insurgencies tied to groups like Al-Shabaab and ISIS factions, particularly in northern Mozambique. This instability adds another layer of insecurity to maritime transport. Imagine being the captain of a ship. Beyond facing storms and violent currents, you also have to weigh the risk of attacks. This chaotic mix amplifies the real dangers of sailing under Africa, turning each crossing into a high-stakes gamble. At the same time, the channel holds fascinating archaeological secrets. Mozambique Island, for instance, is a true treasure trove of ancient shipwrecks, with Chinese porcelain and Portuguese coins preserved on the seabed. These relics tell stories of centuries of trade and tragedy. But while the past is impressive, the present reminds us that not every enemy lies in the weather or the currents. Further north, the coast of Somalia shows the world that African waters are also a stage for modern piracy. If cyclones and currents are already a nightmare, Somalia's coast adds another element, the human threat. During the 2000s, the region became synonymous with piracy. Stories like that of the Maersk, Alabama in 2009 spread worldwide when an American cargo ship was hijacked in open waters, forcing even US Navy intervention. That episode was later turned into a Hollywood movie, but for those who sail there, it represents the harsh reality behind why ships avoid Africa. By 2011, Somali piracy had reached alarming levels, with more than 200 attacks recorded. Entire crews were taken hostage, some only released after months of million-dollar negotiations. Shipping companies began spending fortunes on private security, alternate routes, and insurance. It was proof that the Cape of Good Hope dangers aren't limited to nature, but also to the collapse of public order. When there's no strong government on land, the sea becomes free ground for crime. In recent years, international operations drastically reduced the number of attacks. Yet in 2024, the world saw a resurgence of Somali piracy. Factors such as economic crisis, foreign illegal fishing, and lack of opportunities for young locals reignited the activity. The danger never truly disappeared, it was only waiting for the right moment to return. This recurrence shows how the real dangers of sailing under Africa are cyclical. Even when they seem under control, they can resurface with full force. And perhaps most troubling is that piracy isn't confined to Somalia. Further west, in the Atlantic, another hotspot proves the problem. Far from unique to the Indian Ocean, the Gulf of Guinea, rich in oil and gas, has also become a stage for hijackings and kidnappings, expanding the risk map for anyone daring to sail beneath Africa's coast. If Somalia made headlines in the media, the Gulf of Guinea has become the true epicenter of modern piracy. Located on Africa's west coast, this stretch of the Atlantic combines vast oil and gas wealth with alarming levels of poverty and political instability. That explosive mix has turned the region into one of the world's biggest risk zones, reinforcing why ships avoid Africa. Here, it's not the fury of the sea that threatens, it's the armed hand of pirates hunting cargo ships and oil tankers. Between 2020 and 2021, the numbers hit their peak, with attacks happening nearly every week. Crews were kidnapped at sea and taken into the jungle, where million-dollar ransoms were demanded. In many cases, sailors spent weeks as hostages, living under constant threats. It didn't matter if the ship was carrying oil, soybeans, or containers with everyday goods for the criminals, every vessel was an opportunity. These episodes made it clear that the Cape of Good Hope dangers are not confined to the south, but spread across Africa's coasts. The major issue is the lack of effective international cooperation. While countries like Nigeria and Guinea try to strengthen their maritime security, pirates continue exploiting gaps. Western warships do patrol the region, but the coastline is immense and impossible to fully cover. For shipping companies, sailing here means enormous costs in insurance and private escorts. It's yet another layer of the real dangers of sailing under Africa, as human threats pile on top of natural ones. This reality creates a cruel dilemma. On one hand, the Gulf of Guinea holds some of the largest energy reserves in the world. On the other, it is one of the most insecure seas for any crew. And if piracy is still a challenge today, it's worth remembering that the search for maritime shortcuts to avoid all this instability didn't begin recently. It dates back centuries, with pharaohs, emperors, and even Napoleon dreaming of cutting through Egypt to connect seas and escape Africa's treacherous waters. Long before the Suez Canal existed, pharaohs already dreamed of linking the Mediterranean to the Red Sea. Records suggest that around 1850 BC, Senusret III began work on a canal that connected the Nile to the Red Sea. The idea was simple yet bold: create a shortcut that eliminated the need to sail around all of Africa. This ancient vision shows that, even then, there was an awareness of why ships avoid Africa. The waters surrounding the continent had always been seen as a path to be shunned. Over the centuries, other rulers revived the dream. Necho tried around 600 BC, Darius I continued in 500 BC, and Ptolemy II in the Hellenistic period kept the canal operational. Even the Roman Emperor Trajan ordered it reopened. Yet all these projects were eventually abandoned, whether due to technical difficulties or high maintenance costs. It reflected how the Cape of Good Hope dangers already justified massive efforts to find alternatives. After all, building a canal through the desert seemed more reasonable than risking entire fleets at the continent's southern tip. In the Middle Ages, Arab caliphs also explored the idea but faced the same obstacles. Centuries later, Napoleon Bonaparte studied the possibility of reopening the canal but gave up after flawed calculations suggested the seas were at very different levels. Louis XIV of France also considered the project but lacked the technology and capital to execute it. This cycle of failed attempts illustrates how the desire to escape the real dangers of sailing under Africa spanned generations and entire civilizations. It wasn't until 1869, with the official inauguration of the Suez Canal, that the ancient dream became reality. From that moment, global trade gained a new rhythm, and Africa was no longer the only option for connecting continents. But this grand solution also opened the door to new modern vulnerabilities and sparked the search for even bolder alternatives, such as routes where ice, rather than sand, sets the rules. If in the past kings and emperors dreamed of canals in the desert, today the gamble lies in the Arctic ice. The so-called Northern Sea Route, running along Russia's north, has gained traction thanks to the melting of polar ice caps. It shortens voyages by thousands of miles compared to Suez and eliminates the need to face the Cape of Good Hope dangers. It's a strategic option already receiving direct support from countries like Russia and China, eager to turn ice into a currency of power. This route, however, isn't for everyone. The extreme conditions demand reinforced ships, icebreakers for support, and crews trained to endure freezing temperatures. But in return, the time saved can reach up to 2 weeks on journeys between Europe and Asia. For companies moving billions, each day shaved off means extra profit and less exposure to the real dangers of sailing under Africa. The Arctic Ocean, once seen as an impassable barrier, is now emerging as an economic alternative. Interestingly, the search for shortcuts isn't new. Ancient peoples like the Phoenicians, Egyptians, and Arabs all tried bold ways to bypass or cross Africa. The Phoenicians, for instance, are said to have circumnavigated the continent under Pharaoh Necho II's orders nearly 600 years before Christ. These accounts show that the desire to escape Africa's treacherous waters is as old as navigation itself. The difference is that today technology provides the tools to make this dream far more realistic. And if history has taught us anything, it's that global trade will always seek new routes. When Suez is vulnerable, the Cape of Good Hope returns to the game. When both seem too risky, the Arctic opens up as an alternative. It's this constant motion that keeps alive the question, will humanity ever fully master the sea, or will it always remind us why so many ships still choose to avoid Africa? The seas surrounding Africa remain one of the greatest challenges of modern navigation. Colossal waves, unpredictable winds, piracy, and political instability explain why so many ships still avoid this route. The weight of history and the records of thousands of shipwrecks make it clear. Crossing here has never been and still isn't a simple choice. Understanding these facts means understanding the logic of global trade and the importance of every decision made at a ship's helm. These waters do not forgive mistakes, which is why they remain feared, even with today's advanced technology. If you enjoyed this content and want to keep uncovering maritime stories and secrets, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss the upcoming videos that will reveal even more mysteries hidden in the oceans.